Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a, a well-known professional from the world of wellness from Washington, D.C., USA, Erika Neal. Erika, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Erika is a psychotherapist and a trainer. She's the co-founder of Humanitarian Havening. She's the co-author of books on havening for children and adolescents, Auntie Rosa's Magic Hugs, a story about havening, and Safe to Be Me, havening for teens and young adults. So, Erika, before we start talking about havening, a little bit about yourself first. What inspired your transition from being a lawyer to a children to becoming a clinical social worker and a trauma specialist?
Well, thanks for asking that. To be honest with you, when I was in law school, I was a confused young kid, and I actually thought about getting a degree in social work at the same time as law because I knew I wanted to work in child welfare,
Mhm.
but I wanted to get out in the workforce. So I went and finished my law degree. And as a lawyer, I enjoyed helping children. I was actually representing abused and neglected kids in court, but I
Hmm.
wanted to be in a different role. My role was to help make sure they were in a good placement and were getting services, but I
Hmm.
wanted to work more in prevention and in treatment of the abuse that had happened to them. And
Hmm.
that's why I got the social work degree to have more options for that.
Interesting. And you've trained in so many therapeutic modalities like EMDR, MBSR, Reiki, and more. What drew you to specialize in havening?
Well, one really cool thing about being a therapist is you're always trying to learn new modalities that are very effective and easy.
Hmm.
And when I learned havening, it's so simple and pleasant and fast that immediately I thought this is a great find. And I wanted to learn about it and get trained in it and even become a trainer. I could tell right away how special it was. And that's why I've been sticking with havening so much since then.
Hmm. And for my viewers and listeners, how would you define havening, in simple everyday terms?
So, havening is a treatment modality and also a self care method that uses a certain kind of touch to change the way that the brain stores experiences from unpleasant to pleasant or from pleasant to more pleasant.
Hmm. Okay. And this is used for basically handling a lot of stress and anxiety, is it?
Yes, actually, it can be used both by a practitioner to treat PTSD, phobias, panic disorder, traumatic and prolonged grief, and other mental health disorders. And it also can be used by an individual to improve their own well being.
Thank you. How has your working globally in orphanages and schools around the world shaped your view of trauma and healing across cultures?
Well, it's very much shown me how universal feelings are, which we would know that, but when you
Mm,
experience it, you really understand it better because I've been in many different continents like Africa, India, Asia, and Europe, and I see how the same feelings are arising, and the
mm,
causes might be universally, physical abuse, sexual abuse, betrayal, grief, or it could be specific like war or poverty, but the feelings are the same. The
mm,
feelings of joy and humor and the feelings of sadness and grief and
mm,
anger, they're all the same. So
mm,
it's really helped me realize that that's the issue is how do we address human feelings
mm,
universally?
mm. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about havening your books and spreading awareness. Could you walk us through what happens during a typical havening session?
Sure. Okay. So normally speaking, when somebody comes to me for havening, something's happened to them that's made them upset and it's causing current problems. So for example, someone might come to me because they were in a car accident and they're afraid of driving,
Mm,
or they've been betrayed by a partner and they're afraid to get into another committed relationship, or they had something happen at work that made them feel completely unconfident about themselves
mm,
and they're having trouble moving forward. So what we would do is we would actually target the event and make them feel differently about that event. But I
mm,
would start by describing havening, which actually I'm going to do it right now because it doesn't take very long. So
mm,
I would say havening is a system of touch that improves the way the brain stores experiences. And
mm.
it consists of three places of touch. So the hands, which are like this,
Yeah.
and I'd invite them to do it with me.
Hmm.
The arms, which is Good, nice.
Hmm.
And the arms is which is rubbing the arms from the shoulder to the elbow in a downward sweep, like
Okay.
you're stroking a
Mm.
cat.
Yeah.
And then the face would be like you're washing your face like
Okay.
this.
Yeah.
And these three places of touch produce a lot of calm brain
Mm.
experiences. Then I would say, while you do this, you need to engage the mind in something distracting and pleasant. So I'm
Hmm.
going to give you some things to do.
Hmm.
This helps the havening work better because it keeps the mind engaged in something else.
Right.
So we could go through singing a song. We could count by multiples. We could do spelling. We could name items in categories. I might ask you about a book you've read or a film you've
Mm.
seen or a
Mm.
recipe or a project to keep
Mm.
your mind on something else. So I'd
Right.
find out from you what do you like? What would be nice to talk about? And then what I
Mm.
would say is notice how you feel about this event that happened and
Mm.
give me a score from 0 to 10 on how upsetting it is from you. 0 being nothing, 10 to be the most.
Mm.
And you would tell me what you bring up the feeling in your body, and then you tell me the score. And then I'd say,
Mm.
okay, you don't need to think about that now. Let's focus on the sensations of touch.
Mm.
And we would do the touch together. And then I would have you do these exercises with me.
Mm.
We'll sing songs together. We'll count by multiples. We'll talk about different items and categories. We'll talk about
Mm.
things that interest you. We'll take your mind completely off of it while you
Mm.
do havening. We come back and I ask you, how do you feel now? What's your distress level? And it
Mm.
will drop. And then we'll do more
How
and it will drop
interesting.
more until at the end you actually are not upset about the event. And when you think about the event, you feel okay. And then I'll ask you, how do you feel about the event now? And you
Mm.
might say, fine, okay,
Mm.
grateful. And we'll do havening while you say those words. Okay, grateful, grateful,
Mm.
peaceful,
Mm.
safe. So that's in a nutshell, a very
How
common
interesting. How
session.
interesting. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing this. But Erika, tell me, is there any empirical data or any scientific principles behind why havening works to heal trauma and stress?
Yes, that's a great question. So when havening was created, it was created because there is a scientific process by which the amygdala, which is a fight or flight center, can
Mm.
become deactivated or downregulated.
Hmm.
When you do havening, it causes calm delta brain waves, and that causes the depotentiation or deactivation of receptors on the amygdala. I'll break it down a little bit more. So when something upsetting happens, the
Mm.
amygdala produces receptors to receive stress hormones and stress neurotransmitters. And those receptors remain there. And that's why if you've been in a car accident, the next time you drive a car, you still have that anxiety.
Mm.
Havening touch produces a protein that actually unsticks those receptors and makes them recede back into the amygdala so they're no longer present. So
Mm.
it actually changes the brain architecture. But also, it produces oxytocin and serotonin, so it calms the nervous system, and that also
Mm.
down regulates the amygdala. So, in
Mm.
those two ways, it changes the way that the brain responds to things that used to be triggers.
Mm.
Um, and we've had studies done. We've had about 5 different studies showing the efficacy of havening on reducing blood pressure,
Hmm.
on reducing social inhibition, reducing anxiety, enhancing mood. So we've
Mm.
been doing more and more research to demonstrate the efficacy.
Fascinating. But havening one is to help to reduce stress or distress, but I understand it can also help to strengthen positive emotions and resilience.
That's
Tell me a
absolutely
little
true.
bit more
So,
about the positive part of it.
okay, great. So, havening produces oxytocin, which is the love hormone. When you do touch in these particular places,
Mm.
it's very good for releasing neurotransmitters and hormones, so serotonin and oxytocin. So, that alone is helpful. But we also
Mm.
have techniques such as affirmational havening, which I just mentioned, where you say happy or fine or peaceful while you do the havening, and that
Mm.
augments it even more. And we have even more techniques that amplify the positive
Mm.
feelings too.
Mm. Amazing. How did you approach explaining something as complex as trauma healing in a way that children could understand it?
So we want to use language that's easy for a kid to do.
Mm.
So we might say, for example, the way we describe the havening might be, wash your hands,
Mm.
stroke a cat, put lotion on your face. Let's sing some nursery rhymes. Tell
Mm.
me about what you did this weekend. So you use distractions and descriptions of touch that apply to kids. And we
Mm.
just keep it really simple, like, havening touch makes your brain feel safe and happy.
Yeah. Mm.
And when I teach teachers, I use simple language so that they can teach the same language to the kids.
Mm. And based on all the work that you're doing, What, in your view, are some of the unique stressors facing today's young or teens that makes havening such a useful tool for them?
Well, teenagers and most of us, but particularly teenagers, are confronted with stressors constantly. Then they always have to be ready for something. You know, they're always on social media and they're always perceiving what's being done outside. So I would say that their amygdala is always a bit primed more than it had been for us when we were younger.
Hmm.
So havening is very good because its task is to calm the amygdala, and it can find very good ways to do that fast. So
Hmm.
even teenagers, when they're about to do homework, they might be stressed out. So even havening then is helpful. And certainly it helps with taking tests because you can do havening to calm your mind, and you can also do outcome havening, which helps you visualize a positive outcome.
Hmm.
So it's really good, particularly for adolescents. I find too that they might be a little bit shy about learning it, and they might not show you that they're interested, but later on they will do it because when they're
Hmm.
very stressed, they want something that's fast and pleasant to
Right.
do. So they will do it.
Hmm. And could you give me an example of someone who benefited, one of the teenagers or adolescents who benefited from this process?
Yeah, I have some examples. So one of them is um, a teenager who was about to take the SAT and was very, very scared about it.
Hmm.
So we did some havening on reducing the distress with distractions, and then I had him think about um, a time that he feels confident
Hmm.
and use outcome havening to imagine that feeling placed in that session. So we talked about when he was in marching band and he's playing drums and he feels very confident and his posture is very upright and he knows what he's doing. And we applied that feeling to taking the test so that when he went into the test, he felt confident, like, I got this, I can do this.
Hmm.
That's a very typical example for a teenager because test preparation is very hard for
Yeah.
teenagers, very stressful. Yes.
And how do you see havening fitting into school counseling, mental health curriculums, or even peer support programs for adolescents?
So one great way that havening can fit into mental health situations is very easy. So anytime a teacher or a guidance counselor or a psychologist is talking to a student who's upset, they can
Hmm.
say, "Hey, while we're talking, why don't you just rub your hands like this? This will actually calm your brain and make you feel better." So right off the bat, it's so simple to do in that setting. And even friends can do that. Like if they're talking to each other,
Hmm.
even if you have one person and you're talking to them and they're doing havening, that will calm
Hmm.
your mind.
Hmm.
The other thing is that havening can be done while students are listening to instruction to help them focus and receive it better. And it can be done while they're learning, while they're memorizing something. So it's very easy to add havening because students are just listening. They can
Hmm.
very easily do havening at the same time. You
Hmm.
can also lead lessons while like learning a lesson, a topic while having them do havening. So it's very easy to add into a school day or in crisis situations at school.
Hmm. Wow. What advice would you give to parents or caregivers trying to introduce havening to their children or to their wards?
I would say for parents and teachers to give it a chance. They might think that, oh, kids don't want to learn something new, or this might
Hmm.
seem silly to them, but kids will actually use it because they want something to help them when they're upset.
Hmm.
I've noticed that with my children, my own kids, and also when I've taught it in school, that the kids will say to each other, "Hey, let's do some havening." They'll actually adopt it. So really, all we need to do is show them how to do it, and then they'll use it when
Hmm.
they need to.
Fascinating. You're also the co-founder of Humanitarian Havening. Tell me about this organization. What is its mission, and how did you start it?
So, humanitarian havening, the point of it is to spread relief worldwide as much as possible to places in a lot of crisis and either acute need or chronic need. So, for example, places where there's been like a natural disaster, but also places where there's poverty and other stressors. Um, I started it with a couple of colleagues who are trainers also in havening because I had done work doing humanitarian aid in the past. And I thought, well, what a great way to combine that with doing something that giving them a tool.
Hmm.
And so we decided to just come up with a way of doing havening in a very simple manner to teach people the self-help skill that they could do on their own.
Hmm. And have you faced any challenges when you're trying to introduce havening to communities which may not necessarily be familiar with this kind of a therapy?
When I go to other countries, I try to keep things as simple as possible. I don't get into a lot of jargon, partly
Hmm.
because it might be a different language.
Yeah.
Um, but touch is universal. And
Yeah.
I find I don't need to really explain very much more. People can tell that when they do the touch, they feel better and they understand that they provide touch to reassure each other. So it's
Mm.
actually not that big a leap.
Mm.
That's one reason why it's so effective across cultures.
Mm. But when you look at across cultures, uh, do you see any differences? For example, in some cultures, touching may not necessarily be acceptable. How do you adapt the havening techniques in cultures where touching may not necessarily be acceptable?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm always asking when I get to a different place, how
Hmm.
do you feel about touch? How is this for you?
Hmm.
And most places actually been okay with touch on one's own self.
Hmm.
It might not be the thing they do. Some cultures do a lot more touch than other cultures. The
Hmm.
one that I need to be careful with is we actually can do having on another person. It's called facilitated havening or partner havening, and you do the same locations, but you just do it
Hmm.
on someone else.
Hmm.
When you do it, a lot of the time you don't want to stand right in front of them. You might give them some space and do it on the side. But I
Hmm.
need to be careful in different cultures. How is that perceived? And also to make sure maybe only women to women can do it or
Hmm.
parent to child. And so we're sensitive about that.
Hmm. Well said. I've got time for two more questions for you.
Sure.
Um, I want to ask you about your books. You're a co-author of three different books. Havening for Children and Adolescents, Auntie Rosa's Magic Hugs, a story about havening, and Safe to Be Me, Havening for Teens and Young Adults. Tell me a little bit about these books and what were some of the hypotheses that you had when you started to write these books?
Well, I have two books. One of them actually is the Safe to Be Me is the kids
Okay.
book. It's a
Yeah.
like a picture book, and the other one is an adolescent book. It's very slim actually because kids
Okay.
don't have a long
Yeah.
attention
Yeah.
span.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
so what happened was my friend approached me and said she wanted to write a children's book about havening because she was
Mhm.
working in a preschool, and so I was delighted because I was a school social worker for 15 years, so I've worked a lot with kids. So we wanted to describe havening in a very fun, simple way so that a parent could read about it to a kid or the librarian could read about it in a school, or a
Mhm.
teacher could recommend it to a parent. So that's why we did that book. And in the end, it actually has a section for parents and teachers to
Mhm.
describe the science behind it. But the story itself is a story about how a kid learns havening from her aunt, Auntie
Mhm.
Rosa, who comes and actually does havening on her to begin with, and then says, "Hey, you can do this on your own." And then after we did the kids book, I wanted to do a book for young adults and adolescents.
Mhm.
So I wrote that book more as a self-help tool, so
Mhm.
that kids can do it. And actually, it has a lot of pictures in it because, kids like to have
Yeah.
visuals.
Mhm.
So we tried to do it in a way that was,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
easy for them to access
Mhm.
because they, like I said, they want tools that are quick.
Amazing. And my last question for you, Erica. Could you share a moving story from your experience teaching havening in orphanages or in crisis areas?
Well, I mean, one thing that's been really delightful is I'll go to an area that has been doing havening, and I'll ask the kids, how does havening make you feel? How has it been for you? And they'll say, it makes me feel peaceful. It makes me feel less angry. It makes me feel loved. And it's
Hmm.
very touching seeing these little kids say that.
Hmm.
I also have had experiences where I'll teach a group of teachers and I'll do havening with one of them. And then one of the teachers will just take it on. And I was in a situation where there was like 300 students on the lawn, and she
Hmm.
was leading all of the kids and doing havening really enthusiastically, and they're having a lot of fun.
Hmm.
So it was very touching to me that the people there were adopting it and loving it. I also had a
Hmm.
case where I showed a principal how to do partner havening, and he had all the kids in this classroom of fourth graders pair off with each other as he modeled during partner havening with the teacher.
Hmm.
So, it's so exciting. And then the driver that was taking me around Tanzania said that he was doing it every night with his two daughters
Hmm.
after we had been doing it together.
Hmm.
So, seeing that it's being implemented and that people are enjoying it is very touching to
Hmm.
me.
Wow. And on that note, Erika, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about havening. I mean, I think something new I learned today. I've often heard about the healing touch in so many different cultures around the world, but it's been such a pleasure speaking to you about havening, which is really the healing touch that not only do you know so much about, but have told me and my viewers and listeners in such detail. Thank you for sharing so much of your knowledge with me, and all the very best to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the brand called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.